Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Policy and Curriculum meeting. Today is Wednesday, May 1st at 5:40 p.m. and we are meeting online. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Great. Well, why don't we do just quick introductions for the record, and then I'll do agenda and get us going.
That's perfect. Thanks. I will reintroduce myself. My name is Nyla Biliu, and I am an at-large board member, and I go by she, her, they.
Great.
And I'm Julianne Opperman, District 3 representative.
I'm Sarah Lentz. Pronouns are she, hers. I'm chair of the board and at-large representative.
Right. I'm Aaron Townsend, deputy superintendent, pronouns he, him, his, and staff person for the Policy and Curriculum Committee, and joined by two wonderful teammates tonight. So, Sarah, if you want to go first, and then Scott.
Sure. I'm Sarah Warren. I am in transition from one role to another, but I'm entering in right now to Senior Director of Strategy and moving emergency management with me. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll hand to Scott.
Scott Watson, Assistant Facilities Director for the entire school district.
Right. All right. So tonight, we have kind of two, nominally these are Book E, which is generally our facilities kind of policies. So two policies and one plan up for kind of discussion and revision and, ideally approval. I guess just for the record, we don't have quorum tonight, but we're going to move through the agenda and, schedule another member when members Bondo and Ali are able to join us to take formal action to move these items to the full board. So, sorry. Okay. So yeah, we're hoping to approve revisions to policy ECBA. We're going to start with that one. That's the integrated pest management. And thanks for Scott for joining for that. And then we'll look at EBCA, which is the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. It's got a bit more of an elongated title moving forward. So we'll look at the policy and then probably more time just in relationship to the plan itself. So without further ado, we'll move to the first policy. So policy ECBA, the Integrated Pest Management Policy. So I'll share just a few words about kind of the just the policy side of the updates, and then Sarah and Scott can speak a little bit to just kind of some of our practice around how this works in practice, and we can spend just a couple of minutes if there are questions there. So this policy, as you could see there, it is somewhat of an overhaul and just kind of rewrite, though substantively, it's a lot of clarity. It was one of our older policies on the book. It's one of our state required policies, and it had last been updated in 2004. And there was a new kind of model policy from 2018. So that's just part of why it got flagged for us to review and update. So you can see it's, kind of evolved from just the pest management, this integrated pest management with a little bit more kind of clarity and, around the policy and so forth. So we can look at the language of it if people have questions, but, we've kind of adopted the model policy as is, for now, just because it feels sufficient for kind of our practice in terms of management. So I'll, just a few words, and then maybe I can take the thing down just so we can see each other. Scott, as our assistant director of facilities, is our, is our integrated pest management coordinator. But he can talk about, and Sarah, I don't know if you want to say anything initially, just about kind of how we manage this, and who are some of the vendors we use and what that looks like. So I'll stop sharing for the moment. Where did my thing go?
Thank you. I think the only thing I would want to say in by way of introduction is actually, if you read the procedures, it's supposed to be our custodial supervisor that fills this role. And we don't have that position at this point. So Scott has very kindly stepped in to lead this and many other pieces of work in facilities. And I'm grateful because I'm one of the people who's had the mousetraps taken out of my office. So, but Scott can say a little bit about just the vendor that we work with and how we engage around that.
Sure. In terms of vendors, we use one vendor, is sole performer. It's called Waltham Chemical. The school district's been working with them for the last 20 plus years, and they perform services monthly at all of our schools. To be honest with you, I need to confirm about Cliff Island. I do know that they do work at Peaks Island because they were there last week. And then every month, on a school-by-school basis, we get a report of work done, and we have access to their vendor portal. So we have access to all records at any given time, any requests that would pop up, any additional service work that we need. We also rely on Waltham. I don't know.
Do you want to speak? Well, just, I think, Sarah, we talked about, and I think it might be helpful for them to hear just the, just in relationship to kind of what that service looks like, not the technical specifics of what's used, but just how that fits within the city regulations around notification or not, or and just our adherence to kind of that aspect of things.
So I'll just say, and Scott, you feel free to add to this, that our own current procedures both call for us to notify families at the start of the school year regarding what our policy is with regard to pest management. Aaron and I are double checking to see if that actually went out this past year. I was not quite involved, and there were a lot of things going on, I think, in August. So we're going to double check sure that we met that standard. And if we didn't, we will be sure that we build it in the coming year, certainly. And then beyond that, it requires us to follow regulations in terms of when we notify families if there's going to be some kind of a treatment or if there's an issue in a building. And so that, my understanding from talking with our team, is that we haven't hit that threshold for anything this year. Scott, is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. Any of those products on a list on a city level, actually, in this case, the city of Portland has specific chemicals. There needs to be notification if there's any exposure within 48 hours after an application. So before the application is even applied, that notification would go out. Basically, the vendor would get an all clear from us, and then they would make that application. From September, beginning of school year till now, there hasn't been anything in that category that has been applied at Portland School District.
Right. Right. Any questions about the policy or just any of the kind of practice around it? Go ahead, Julianne.
The thought is, are we talking primarily these days, since we're talking about ants and mice? I mean, just like people are having their homes. The thought is, what pests are we managing? We don't have, boa constrictors coming in or anything of that sort, do we? Or that level, but that would be
no. But pest can be, another common one is bees.
Oh, yes.
We do, and sometimes that can play into that notice before application. But they try alternative options before going to that route and have been. This is my first spring, summer in Maine, so I don't know what it's going to be like for those kind of requests moving forward. But and then we also have just things like sometimes bed bugs can play a role in certain school systems. And then other types of things like squirrels getting into places they shouldn't be, things like that.
Okay, that's, it's just, since we're talking about it, instead of thinking, crazy thoughts. Do we use any, I just know there's always these kinds of non-toxic herbal kinds of things. Are those any of the type of thing that they might be using?
So a lot of what our service is mouse containment units, where there is a gel type bait that goes inside there, and that is, I'm not good with percentages, but it's a very high percentage of the work that they do for us. And again, I don't have any experience or needs to go outside too far of that basic mice.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, my question was similarly, and I see the note and the policy about the definition. Like, I was just curious, like, could we talk through whether or not to have a definition of pest? And the one that's in the note, mold is not included in this, right? Mold is not considered a pest?
No, that wouldn't be.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
indoor air.
Just double checking. I can't remember all my scientific branches of fungi and all the things. So, like, I don't know what the Julianne and Nylette, if you feel the need to have the definition in here, but I don't think it would hurt.
Yeah, I think any opportunity to be clear is good.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, it seems like, that was in the old one. I see that comment there. Initially, that was the old one that was reviewed. And then we can find a place to integrate that into into this, and probably somewhere in the introduction or something like that. Definition. That sounds good. Yeah, just when the first reference to pest comes up, we can add something parenthetical there that defines it. Okay. Julie, one more?
Yeah, so however, that one does say fungus and microorganisms, bacteria, and of that sort, and I don't know that, we want to do which classification, which animal or mineral, which kingdom, because these are all their own, nematodes or worms and the like. So I guess, I guess it would be probably maybe something a little simpler, maybe more defined, if we're not doing fungus or bacteria or that's, or actually, what is it? Protists, amoebas, that kind of thing. So that isn't the purview of Waltham Chemical. I think it's to make sure we don't have any amoebas crawling around.
Yeah, some of those needs, I think we would rely on our landscape service providers more than, when I think of pest control, it's usually around the perimeter and inside of structures.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of some of those other items, I think of maybe being in a field, in a ball field, or on a walkway entering the school.
Mm-hmm.
So do they follow the same protocol then, same policy and protocol on the grounds that this protocol follows?
Yeah, so I don't, so we have an outside provider on our lawn care for about 10 facilities. And I know that they have policies with handling chemicals. I can't speak to the city's protocol, but I would think that it's very similar.
It's the cities that manages that one. Okay.
Yeah, it's about 50-50 throughout the school district.
Okay.
And I know, I mean, I don't remember the specifics of it, but I know we've gone through a transition through some adoption in city policy about, just minimizing the use of pesticides and kind of harmful chemical stuff,
Yep.
in some of the field maintenance and so forth, using more organic kind of stuff that led at one point a few years ago to some increases in our chargebacks on that side because of those standards. So I know those standards are in place somewhat broadly, kind of within the city code. Okay, well, we'll take that as maybe a friendly amendment to kind of include the definitions there, just so for the clarity point, as you said, Nilet. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Scott, for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Helpful to hear all that's happening. Appreciate you for managing that.
Thank you. Go Celtics. Bye.
Very good. Bye, Scott. All right. We'll keep rolling. Let me go to the next piece. Sorry. All right. So our comprehensive now health, safety, and emergency plan. So statute, that's one of the changes. So there were some modest language revisions just to the policy itself, to align to some of the language in the state statute, and then just some clarifying language. So, I think as you saw in the review of the policy, not a lot of changes to the policy itself, right? Just some of those language ones for clarity and alignment to the statute. And then, a little reworking of the language to kind of clarify what's public and then where we can hold some exclusions from a safety perspective, from things like FOIAs and so forth. So those are the main updates to the policy. And then the plan as required is, we've already, saw an earlier draft of this earlier this fall. We've updated that now kind of to have as kind of the standing one that would be kind of our ongoing one that we would update, on an annual basis, kind of per the timelines included in the plan. So, I'll just say briefly and then kind of turn it over to Sarah. It includes all the kind of, required elements, from both kind of the Department of Ed perspective. It's consistent with other plans and examples from the Department of Education. So, we've been in communication, or Sarah's, consulted with a few other districts as we tried to navigate what was the best way to kind of present the plan. And then I think overall it kind of provides a roadmap at this level, right, for our work to kind of ensure preparedness for emergency situations. So, it feels like, an authentic kind of governing document that we can use to ensure kind of this annual kind of monitoring and review in terms of, being prepared in case something goes awry in one way or another. So that's some of the high level. Maybe before we get into the plan, because I think that's probably where we'll spend more time for discussion, just on the policy. Are there any questions about the language changes on the policy, not on the plan? Because I think then we can kind of bring the plan up and look at it a little bit section by section, but the policy was not super substantive in terms of the changes. We were really bringing this one forward because of the required plan element, not because there was something significant in the policy itself that was out of date or so forth. I mean, clearly there's some updating, but are people good with just the minor language changes to the plan? Okay. All right. Okay. So let me, so Sarah, I'll kind of turn it over to you as I kind of get the plan up here.
Great.
You can do a little bit of overview and then we can open it up for conversation and discussion.
So as Erin said, we have, this is an updated version of what we presented in November. It is relatively long, I will admit. And happy to have feedback on that. In looking at what other districts had done to see, kind of how we benchmark. Some did really long and some did really short, like 2 pages. But we were trying to be as open and transparent as possible, while also reserving some of the more detailed elements for our standard operating procedures that would be, only visible to board members and, sort of key staff or partners with a particular need to know. So we've tried to land this in the best place possible, while also making sure that we're hitting all of the elements that are required according to state law and our own policy. So as it states here, there's this scope and purpose of the plan and how we develop it, then the auditing for safety and preparedness, roles and responsibilities, chain of command, and information sort of management strategies. So all of those are addressed here. One thing to emphasize is that this is part of a broader effort, which Erin can speak to more if you want to, and has been leading around our school safety framework. And as I come into the district, one of the things that's really important to me to make sure we keep emphasizing is how we are working to build safe, welcoming, and joyful schools for everybody, for our staff and our students. And that is really requires a focus on relationship building and community building. And that is the strongest foundation we can build for keeping everybody safe. And so while we get into some of the nitty gritty around how we do various aspects of safety management, we want to just keep remembering that we have to keep investing in and focusing on that relationship and community building piece. So you'll see that the way this is organized, it's broken down according to the 4 key elements of emergency management that FEMA puts forward. And again, this is pretty consistent with our colleague districts as well. It's a national standard, so that makes it relatively simple. But what we've done here is just lay out the FEMA definition for each of these things: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And then given a few of the key actions that we're taking in each of those areas. So when we think about mitigation, we're really talking about how do we avoid having an emergency at all? And if we're going to have one, how can we minimize the impact of that by doing some things in advance? So making sure that we're, prepared with the appropriate district and school level teams that are focused on these issues. You can keep scrolling, Erin. And then, doing some of the things that we know are useful upfront, like looking at our facilities and what are the things that we need to have in place to try to make our schools as safe as possible. Erin and I actually have just recently had a meeting with our partner at the police department and walked through some of those things and talked about where some of the priorities for that work. And so that's something that would be an ongoing effort. And then making sure we've got procedures in place in every building to do that sort of management work and prevention of a potential incident. And there's a lot of, testing of alarms and making sure that we've got our proper procedures in place for identifying and supporting a student who might be a risk to themselves or others, training folks for this kind of stuff. So that's the mitigation part. Preparedness is making sure that we're ready and that our folks across the district are ready in the event that there is actually something that takes place. And this could be anything from a fire to a bomb threat to a power outage or another utility outage. So I think often when people think about safety and emergency management in schools, they go straight to, violent shooter threat or something like that, which is part of this, but it's actually much broader, what we're trying to be prepared for. So everything from just, our radios, our communications mechanisms, and training and doing drills to get everyone ready for a potential scenario. And then response, if something happens, we've got a number of measures that we would take. And a huge piece of this is being very coordinated around who's leading at the building level, who's leading at the district level, making sure communications are strong. And when something happens, having that ability to quickly put into motion a response plan so that if needed, we've got our central office team and leadership coming out to support a school where that's useful, and yet the person on the ground who's leading, typically a principal, is equipped and has the plans and the clarity in place around how they're going to manage on the ground. And this includes a number of different potential responses to a situation, including potentially a lockout or a lockdown in an extreme situation, but it might also mean evacuation. And one of the things that we are focused on is, clarifying and codifying our evacuation and relocation procedures and locations, so that if we end up having to move people out of a building or even off-site to a different location, that we're well prepared to do that, and that it's well coordinated and everybody maintains safety as much as possible throughout that process. I will make one note here on the relocation thing. Most of this is really about our staff at both the district and the school levels and how we're going to manage through anything that happens. But we will also have things that we're going to need to work with our families on and communicate to our families. I know it's tempting when there's something and folks are worried, they want to come straight to the place where their child is, but we'll have to work with folks to help them understand that we need them to go to a different place, and just working with our community to learn how to support our whole community in these situations. And then recovery is really important that we don't forget that. It's we hope we don't have incidents, but every now and then there will be something that takes place, and we want to make sure that we're following up in appropriate ways to support whichever building or community is affected. That could be just bringing in folks to do a quick assessment of the building to make sure that it's safe and that we're quickly addressing any damage that may have been done. But then it's also tending to the social and emotional impact by providing mental health services, making those available not only to students, but to staff where needed. And then, and obviously we have our employee assistance program that's a part of that, addressing the staff issue. And then, as we have been doing for this past year, making sure that when there's anything that happens, we have a chance to pause and learn from it and update our understanding of how we do these things, and making sure we're sharing that learning so that we can improve our practice as we go. So the law and the policy require us to give more detailed standard operating procedures, or to have more in-depth action steps that we'll take in the event of a number of different types of incidents. And again, these will be codified in a place that is not public. But you can see here a list of the types of things that we're addressing through that process. And then, as Erin said, we had one scheduled for this year, just as a way to sort of get ourselves to this point, and because this was a major revision year. But I think that as we move forward, it'll probably be more updating and adapting. And so we're anticipating working on this again with as many lessons learned as we can bring into the process in a sort of January to March timeframe. And then, the policy technically has to be reapproved each year with the updated plan. And so we bring that back to the committee and then to the board in the April-May timeframe. And as soon as we do that work, then it's essential that we update our school-based plans or building-based plans so that any changes we've made or lessons we've learned get incorporated into what happens at the planning on the ground in individual buildings. So we're also required to do auditing. So we will be conducting safety audits. And I mean, we already do actually. The fire department comes in and looks at tests the alarms and that kind of thing. But what we're intending to do is a little bit of a, beefing up of that process. And it does, I think, necessitate their ongoing partnership with folks like the fire department and Portland Police, because they're our essential partners in this. And then if we have any concerns, it gives us a chance to address those and update our plans. Again, the chain of command is extremely important, especially if there's a sort of significant emergency and things are intense. For the most part, that person on the ground would be either a principal or an assistant principal, or say, depending on the building, it could be an executive director. But that person needs to be sort of identified and in place in advance. And then in the event of an emergency, we have laid out these steps that the person would go through. So that sort of triggers the next series of steps. So there are things that would be going on at the school level or the building level. And then it would also, lead to a call or a text to someone at the central level who would then follow up and initiate the central office response as needed. When we think about the central response, it is both providing on-the-ground support to the schools. It's potentially providing, if we end up having a relocation site and needing to support schools and families through relocation or pickup process, we would have folks on site for that. We would deploy our communications people to help both in communicating with our own community internally and with the broader community around us. And then sometimes there's a need for other types of technological support. There could be, in the event that there was a more serious incident with injuries, we would have people on site at area hospitals as needed. And then again, we would be supporting parent reunification if that ended up being an issue in a given situation. And as you can see, we're trying to make sure we hit all the points that were required here. So we go into a little bit more detail about the communication strategies. There's first of all, a focus on how do we communicate at the school level. And we've been working on making sure that our public address systems are functioning properly and that they are not all tied to like an internet connection that goes down, so that there's a backup, other ways that people can access that. And then communication systems that schools can use if whatever their normal way isn't, and that isn't available, sorry. And then, making sure that we're thinking about all of our students and staff, including those that have disabilities, to make sure that they have the ability to gather the information that they need. And again, this chain would be put into motion as needed, where the school notifies someone at the central level, and then the central level sets in motion the support from the central office team. That is it.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for your work to get this document to where it is. It's helpful. Okay, yeah, we can open it up. I'll leave it up for now, just in case we want to refer to different pieces of it here. So, Julianne?
Yes, it's really clear, and you're right, it's really long, which is that's not a bad thing to have all those details there. I have a couple weird little questions and then bigger questions. The one I think I'm thinking of the viewpoint of the teacher. The kids, you want to have it as practiced as they can, so it's an automatic response to some kinds of behaviors. And so and it does say on one of the pages that there be regular drills. I don't know if you're going to do a requirement of that. Whether the fire department requires evacuation drills or how many of those are happening. And you always had to do them early in the year because it's nice out. You don't want to do it in January if you can't help it. Unless you're doing an evacuation. I guess those kinds of drills. And the other piece is I'm just thinking as a teacher and you're doing the audit that there are those corners of the building that seem to be, that maybe need extra something. So just a comment, I'm sure on your process, you'll look at that. But I just, having been in different kinds of experiences and all, so I guess that's at the building level, and all the details should not be public, but if there was some kind of diagram that said a parent can have on the refrigerator that says, if you are concerned that something's happening, contact this person, or this kind of thing. If there is and you want to be there physically, this is the location to go for each school, so that it's like you don't have them, so they know the parents know what to do ahead of time, and a thought. So yeah, I think in flow charts. So, flow charts, bubbles, and all those kinds of pieces, so that and that also might help in multilingual situations, where you have your central little pieces. I just would love to make sure that there are site-based plans, and you're right about getting individuals who are fearful of loud noises, in the elementary schools, and play with people who are physically have a difficulty going across the room, much less leaving a building or going to a safer place. Just the special ed people are really good at that, but that they have all the supports for that. So, but I think it's what's here is great. You can't put all of this on a flow chart, but somehow something that's a little bit easier to get a quick look at would be, for me, awesome. That, and knowing that the schools have buildings plans, and that there's a communication plan within the building. There's a communication plan outside of the building with phone numbers or whatever, those type things. And again, that doesn't have to be super public, but that they're there, knowing that they're there, and is, it's been there, done.
Yeah. I think maybe you mute. Can you guys hear me? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I can maybe respond to a couple of things quickly, and welcoming Vice Chair Bondo, other member of the Policy and Curriculum Committee. Thanks for joining us, Ms. Bondo. We are just a quick catch up. We talked about the pest management stuff, so we'll hold a little space at the end to see if you had any questions about that policy. We had our Assistant Director of Facilities, Scott Watson, with us earlier just to talk that through. But and then we, looked briefly at the nominal changes to the policy, but are just diving into the plan now. So I'm joining for that discussion. Just briefly on the drills. Yes, the state requires a certain number of drills per grade span. At the elementary, 10 drills are required, 2 of which must happen within the first 2 weeks of school. At middle school, it's 8 drills, and at high school, it's 6 drills. However, for this year, we required all schools to do 10 drills to do the same for this year, as we were kind of rebuilding back. So when we hit that mark on everybody did 2 in the first 2 weeks of school, and we've broken those out in terms of evacuation, lockdown, and, in kind of the violent critical incident, as we've been starting to build our capacity around kind of the ALICE strategies for when there is an active shooter-like situation. So we've been been fortunate of the partnership with Portland Police, who's helped to complete those trainings with all staff. And we're kind of building some of the resources around how we engage students with those pieces. And we're on track. I feel really good about where schools are at in terms of completing those regimented kind of 10 drills. So certainly some schools, now are kind of coming back to it. It was sparser a little bit during the winter, particularly on the evacuation drills. Better to do the lockdown in the winter, evacuation in the fall and spring. So there's a few schools have a few left, but I feel like we're in pretty good shape on that front in terms of drills. And then school plans, yes, all schools have plans. That's been a requirement to update. I think part of what this work is doing for us is the kind of clarity and consistency of those plans are going to be significantly improved as we move forward. So I think we didn't have as clear of kind of guidance and document, in terms of this overarching plan previously, in terms of like what the comprehensive emergency management plan was. So they have had plans. They all updated them at the beginning of the year, identify the kinds of roles that Sarah was talking about who's incident command, and if they're not there, who's the backup, and the different roles of the safety team. Beyond the drills, they're expected to have a safety team meeting, so everybody knows their roles, and those kinds of things. And those get documented for us. So some of those things are in place, and I think will continue to get better. And then one thing, and I don't know, Sarah, if maybe you were going to chime in on this too, but I think we're figuring out the relocation thing, is in reunification, I think are continued, fortunately, we don't have to use them very often. So it's not our most practiced routine. And there is some, this has been something we have focused on with PPD about how to think that through in the context, particularly of kind of the Alice protocol. So Sergeant Hayden has been really a wonderful partner. It has been great to work with him. So we had a meeting over break, really trying to identify what are appropriate locations. But there is some question about, and it is a tension, not a bad one, but just it is a tension of like, I think from the police perspective, they very much would prefer that those are not public nor shared in advance. Because they don't want those to become targets, right, is the unfortunate reality. At the same time, that certainly challenges our communication, right, and the issues Sarah's talking about. So, I think that's something we're still kind of growing in a little bit, but that's just to acknowledge that question. It would be nice, like it's, put it on the thing. If there's an emergency, you go to. Really, we identified a lot of churches as relocation points because, they have big spaces where kids could sit that aren't being used Monday through Friday during school hours, typically, right? And we have a number of them in proximity to our schools as potential kind of reunification points or relocation points. But so we're kind of talking that part through about how do we, kind of manage that communication and so forth. So I don't know, Sarah, if anything else there you were going to. To say.
I don't think so. I think you hit it.
Yeah. Hey, Mickey, welcome.
Thank you so much. Little sorry, I had a family issue, so I had to fix. Just came back. I just get a question here when you mentioned about the churches around our school. Do we have any? Do we have a listing, and how the communication piece can be done? Let me just rephrase that. Do we have a list of all the area space like a churches where, then we can evacuate our students in case we need and around different schools? And if you already created the communication with those churches to make sure then we can use those spaces? I just need to make sure if the protocol, that's the way the protocol should be and what we have already done.
So I can answer that, Erin, and jump in if I miss something. So one thing we might want to do is just talk a little bit about evacuation versus relocation. So let's say in the event of a fire, we might evacuate students out of the building to a rally point, right? So the rally point is probably relatively close to the school. It's just a place where we can gather people, make sure everybody's accounted for. And if we know the building is safe, we can send them back in. If it's a more serious thing where we need to get them away from that building, then that's a relocation point, and that would mean sending them farther away, not right on site. And the relocation points are the thing that Aaron was just talking about, that in our conversation with Portland Police Department, they do not want us to make public, because that is potentially, dangerous. So people could target relocation sites. So, we have them in the current plans that the schools have, but we are, again, reviewing all of those and looking at multiple options for each of the schools, so that it's not just one possibility. And actually, our next step is to circle back to our school leaders and to those potential community partners to determine what's actually feasible. So some of it is about, who is willing to do it with us, who might be available to open their building if they're not there during the day or would have someone on site as, staff. And then it's also just a question of size, location. We tried to start identifying places that would be safe for people to get to. If we got to an incident like this, we would obviously have the police involved very quickly, and they would be around to support us. But we would be, trying to move people in the safest way possible. So that factors into our thinking about what those relocation sites might be. But those will not be published publicly for safety reasons. And as Aaron said, that does complicate our communications a little bit, because that means we can't just say to a family, if something happens, it's this place, right? So we'll have to be really, very clear in our communications. In the event of an incident, we'll have to communicate clearly with our families where we're sending people. And in that event, the police department would be, bolstering support around whatever relocation site we choose.
Thank you, Sarah. It really makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Sarah?
I'm also happy to defer to any other committee member if they want to speak first. But seeing no other hands, I am just really thankful for this. I think it does give clarity to a lot of things that didn't have clarity before, at least at a high level. So I just appreciate the work and prioritization of this policy. There's a couple of things that I flagged as I was reading through, which I really appreciate that we have, and this may be a legal thing that we have to do, but I appreciate it anyway, making advanced preparation for students that might be deaf or hard of hearing. But I also just wonder if there's anything around multilingual students that could be woven into this policy as well. Just thinking about, like, if kids don't have access to Google Translate or their interpreter, new young people, how are we thinking about that? And I'm just going to run through kind of like all my thoughts, and you can address them now or later, whatever works for you. In the communications plan, I think that there has been some question about, like, what is a school-wide communication versus a community-wide communication, and when does each one happen, and at what point? Like, I do think that there is, like, logic being used to do those communications, and I don't know if that is in a public document, but I think it is worth, like, thinking through and being recorded somewhere. One thing that I have noticed this year, has been, like, more consistent in our communications, the email address that communications are coming from changes a lot. And I think it's confusing to parents. And I just wonder if there's a way to standardize what emails come from what email addresses, and then really, really stick to those. One thing that I've heard from educators a lot is around the PA system, like, what happens if that is out? So I'm glad to hear that it sounds like that we're going to be able to use that if the internet is down. Is that what I was hearing? Or you're working on that?
Yeah, well, we're trying to make sure there's always a, a landline connection as well. That's not to say it will never go down because everything could go out.
Of course.
So that's why we also have to have the other things in place. And honestly, we had a power outage at Moore a few months ago, and we were sending runners out to talk to people because we just, cell phones weren't working right. Internet was, it was hard, and we had to improvise. And I think, that's exactly the nature of this type of planning, is like, we do our best, we put as many things in place as we can, and then we have to deal with the actual situation that presents itself.
Right. And I, yes. And I love that the chain of command here is just so super clear. So it feels like people will know then who is making those decisions and where the information is going to come from, which I think is a great step. And like, I think if we can go that granular and say, if PAs are totally down, like what happens then? The person that's in charge then distributes staff out into the building. I know that like at some point in the last year, it was like administrative assistants that were like communicating things for teachers. I just think, and this kind of goes to just like, I would love at some point even more kind of updates or understanding of the implementation and how this information gets to teachers, because I do think that there's definitely fear, right? And rightly so, about these emergencies and not understanding the procedures, which I know some of that onus goes to our teachers to make sure that they're reading what they need to be reading. And, but just like, how do we make sure that teachers know how they're going to teachers and staff know how they're going to get information. And then, sorry, just to cup one more thing, which is just around like the debrief, which I love that that's being built into this policy, but I almost wonder if the committee would think about, an amendment about like how, at what point, like within 7 days, within like putting a time frame on that so that the learning can be happening. And then also the other piece that isn't said out loud in this policy is that like what do you do with that debrief information? Does that mean that it gets updated to policies or updated to practices? But just like what is the point of the debrief? I think we can be clear. I think we know what it is maybe already, but if we can be clearer in the policy, I think that would be great.
I mean, yeah, just building off that last thing, going backwards. I mean, we can look at, what language tweaks we might have to kind of clarify purpose. I will say, and, kind of time frame, that makes sense to me. We have that would be consistent with some other things like we have in Chapter 33 rules and things like that, where there's expectations of within specific periods of time. So that can all make sense. I'll share the 3 times we've had situations this time. They happen like that afternoon. It's both part of just like, once things have settled down, we're back under control, then we sit down. So I think it'd be easy to say, within.
And I do think that like leadership currently is really invested in that, and it does have a strong practice of that. I think I'm more just thinking like in the future, if as staffing changes, like let's just like set the expectation for that is, what we do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the other thing is that we haven't done it for every single thing, right? But we've done it for anything that was sort of significantly disruptive. And so I don't know. Well, I appreciate your comment about the, just being more specific about how we do it and how we apply the lessons learned. And I think we might want to say a little bit more about, we don't do it for things that end up being a relatively small incident, unless we think there's a need to, learn something from it. But we want to make sure that whenever there's a significant incident, we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Aaron. Sarah, was there a friendly amendment that you said at the end there?
No, I had just invited the committee to think about adding a friendly amendment to like the time of the debrief, adding a timeline to the debrief.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, just scrolling to figure. I don't remember exactly where the debrief is. Oh yeah,
I mean,
post-incident right there.
I think you had maybe suggested a week, which sounds reasonable to me. I don't know how the committee feels about that. And the only other thing I wonder about is if it were a really, really big incident, then I could imagine us needing to come back and say, hey, I'm sorry, but we're still dealing with the immediate aftermath. We're not ready to do the learning piece yet. But in general, as Aaron said, I mean, and Ryan have been doing these pretty fast. So it seems like a week is reasonable unless the committee wants to see us even shorten that time frame.
And could we specify, so would that be for the whole public or for the board?
No, it's more for the individuals involved in the incident. So, it's typically been with, like in the Casco situation, it was with, all of the principals, assistant principals, from each of the buildings, other kind of central office folks who are involved in kind of managing the situation. And I think in that one was, we had a PPD representative. I know back to the Portland High one a year ago, we actually had, kind of as it says, like a joint debrief about the whole situation ultimately with Portland Police and Portland Fire, because they were both involved in that situation. So it's not, it's just for the ones kind of who have been responsible, some of the folks in that chain of command ultimately, right, to kind of debrief what happened, why, and the lessons learned and so forth.
Yeah, but the debrief is being sent out to the community, right? Like the time. Okay, so I don't know if I understand. So the 1 week would be to wait to understand all of the. Okay, maybe somebody explain it.
Yeah, no problem. The 1 week would be the limit, so that it's just sort of a nudge for staff to make sure that we're doing it and that we're doing it relatively quickly after the incident, so that it doesn't just sort of slide and then you forget what happened. Or so it's really internal. But you mentioned the board, and I mean, Aaron, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense has been that the superintendent has, he's the lead on communicating with the board when something happens, and then keeping you all updated. And then I think, to the extent that there are things that need to be shared about what happened or lessons learned or whatever in the wake of an incident, he would initiate that communication with the board.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to get a better understanding. So the communication would or the 1 week would be for the staff to give them enough time to create the report. And
yeah, it's not really a report so much as it is a convening of the key players. So if it was at a school, probably the principal, a couple of the key folks from the district level, maybe the police, fire, if they were involved. So just the key people involved in the incident coming together to discuss and identify any lessons learned, things that went well, things that could be improved. So it's really an internal learning and improvement process for staff and key partners involved in the incident. It's not to create a report that would go out to anyone publicly, because again, a lot of this information will be safety related and may not be things that we want shared publicly.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand better now.
Julian?
Okay, thanks. I think what Sarah Lentz was talking about was probably the very last piece of the whole thing. It says Executive Director of Communications, Community Partnerships, and Communication Coordinator will manage follow-up communications, including a detailed communication regarding the event once the event is over. And so what you're saying, that seems to be the place but that's what Nilette's talking about. It says executive team and relevant school leaders will review before distribution. So I guess, unless it's somewhere else, and like I said, I read the whole thing, but I don't want to read detail every page, but whether to say that detailed communication regarding the event once the event was over within 5 days, 5 business days or something along that sort. I guess there's two things there. It's the
Yeah, there's like a difference between, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at, the difference between the community communication versus the internal communication. This is getting to like a week for the internal communication base, or like a week for them to figure out like what happened, like do all the diligency of like who was involved, like basically get a good understanding of how to move forward. And then there has to be a piece where the community comes in, right? Like where they're informing community of how to move forward as well once they've figured that out. And so that's what I'm trying to understand, like when does the community come in, and can we also look at the time frame for that?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I mean, Erin, I think my recollection is that for the most part, these have been like same day communications to the community.
Yeah.
To just try to keep people updated. And I think part of the point in framing it this way in terms of, and we should probably just make this a lot clearer, regarding the events, once the event is over, I think the point there was to say, we can't promise you that we're going to tell you everything that's happening in the middle of it, because we're just trying to manage the crisis. And our priority is to make sure that we're communicating with and supporting our schools and our, the affected staff and students. And so I think that's what we were trying to get at when we wrote it that way here, was like, as soon as we're able to, we're going to come and let the community know what happened. But I think in at least a couple of the situations that I recall, we were getting a lot of calls and emails and demands for information while we were still managing the emergency, which is really challenging. And so somehow I think we have to be able to, express empathy and understanding that people want information. I get that part. I think we all do, but also being able to manage expectations a little bit about not sending stuff out right in the middle of the crisis, but after it's over.
Yeah.
So usually same day.
Could there be a piece on there about exactly what you're just talking about, like the prioritization of internal understanding before, like, I don't know, just like the wording of like, if that makes sense, like you're going to prioritize like, the points that you need to accurately represent the issue before, you prioritize making the public understand some of the key issues or what happened.
And there's another piece exactly what Nyla had said, but also not everything in the debrief would be going out into the public. But my question is, and this is, how do we know, will be any kind of report of recommendations going forward that is made concrete? And that's, things that involve FERPA, but that there is some kind of a record, be it, that is appropriate, and some that may be not public information due to safety concerns. But that should be somewhere so that people can so people internally or the police or whatever could reflect on it. So I guess there's two pieces there: the very public stuff, which would include most of what is discussed in private in the debrief meeting, but also some way to make sure that we don't keep having to reinvent the wheel again. I guess that's my concern about that.
Let me maybe say two things, because I think I hear those points. I think part of what does happen in the debrief is actually also debriefing the communications. So it's like this last part about communications is really informing the community. The first part, and it's clear, hearing kind of feedback generally around kind of how to clarify in some of this and kind of do the prioritization, like you said, Nyla. But this is like, okay, when something's immediately going down, just so that we know procedurally, like we're going to try and blast just short updates. There's a safety issue or whatever it is, right? So that people are aware and have initial information. And then once it's done, provide a more comprehensive update, right? About, this is what happened today. This is it. Everybody's fine. We're offering these kinds of supports or whatever the relevant things are to say. But that needs to happen before even the debrief occurs, right? Because, families need to know, and staff and everybody, just like the full accounting of kind of what happened and what the response was and so forth. The debrief of lessons learned happens subsequent to that, and communications is part of the debrief. What went out to who? How did that go? What feedback have we heard, etc. So I think the lessons learned, documenting the lessons learned, I would say, comes back, and we can think through internally how we manage that, right? I'm going to go to the revision process.
Well, so it's that people realize, we do have to make some kind of a comment on, this beyond the communication piece, but the record to say, these are things that we would want to change. Okay, and I'm sure it's somewhere, but where is it? That's the question.
Well, and just that it would come back forward in this January-March thing, right? Lessons learned for incidents that come forward, it comes back into this process in terms of plan revision, right? So we would be bringing back, okay, we had these incidents, we've learned these lessons, right? And sure, we need to have some internal mechanism to kind of track those notes, track the records from each of the debrief, but it'll come forward as we seek to revise the plan every year. It was kind of based on these incidents, right? We are proposing these revisions. So I think that's where, anyway, the knowledge gained, right, from those experiences surfaces to be able to inform revisions in this cycle. Here.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I appreciate
there are more immediate sort of urgent changes. I think, we would obviously not wait on just revising the plan. We would go back and take those to our school leaders and, the folks involved in implementing the plan to make sure that we were, constantly improving our practice. So it hits in different places. And I think you're right. Like there may be some things that end up coming into this version of the plan, but other things that will end up being, off the, record, the confidential part of the SOPs.
Mm-hmm. But I think there's some things, definitely that last part of communication was really written from a procedural point of view internally, right, to help clarify, because I think we had differing practices where principals would be sending out a message here or there, and just to kind of clarify roles and responsibilities. So that some of that language really came from some of the internal guidance about how we're going to kind of manage it. And I can imagine ways we can look at that again here to just tweak it for a little bit kind of further clarity and along some of the lines we've talked about.
So what you're most concerned in that line is that will a review before distribution? Those are the key pieces on that, as much as the time frame for that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the pieces. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. They were all on the same page with the message going out. And at times there's coordination with Portland police, depending on the incident, where we engage with them as well in terms of, what's appropriate to share, right? Depending on status of an investigation. Are they taking the lead on some of that communication and we're linking to it or referencing it? So
there's a lot of pieces, depending upon the situation.
Yeah. Okay. Just monitoring time. I did want to talk just outside of this, just a little bit of a kind of scheduling agenda question for the committee for our May 28th meeting. So hoping we can just save a couple minutes for that. But now that we have Ms. Bondo has joined us, we didn't have quorum before, so while we are always so happy to see you, we are especially happy to see you tonight. Because we were going to call a little mini meeting before the board meeting just to procedurally move things forward. But the next steps would be, if folks are comfortable with this, to take it to the next level. And again, we would host, a workshop next Tuesday on the 7th. So again, we'd have kind of two work, or we'd have a pretty big policy workshop, right? Because we have the special ed policies from April, and then we'll do the pest management, of which I don't think that'll be a big discussion, but and then this one would be the bigger one. So that would be the next steps if people are comfortable moving it forward. Julianne, you have a question before we go?
I was going to move that we move the comprehensive emergency management plan draft April 26, 2024, and the accompanying
Policy.
I don't know what the letters are for the policy forward to the board for review.
Sorry, can I just ask Aaron, I don't know if we did actually enact that friendly amendment or if y'all are going to work on that language.
Yeah, we'll hear that. We'll have that reflected in the draft that's would be presented for the first read.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Okay.
Did you want me to?
The motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Sorry. So do we?
Yeah.
The motion moves to the full board. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Everybody in favor? Great. All right. And Ms. Bondo, maybe just to give you a chance, I don't know if you had a chance to review the pest management policy. Did you have any? We had some discussion. People felt comfortable with it, but just kind of procedurally, just want to give you a chance to see if you had any questions about that policy.
No, I get it because we had a presentation, I think, a couple months ago at the board. So I got already my notes. I think I already got the big picture, but on the policy wise, I got it. So yes, when all of you been talking, I already get my mind. So
okay,
I'm comfortable. Thank you, Amy.
Great. Okay. Well, appreciate that. So we'll move those forward, staying on track here. So excited about that. So maybe, thank you all for that. Thank you, Sarah, for bringing this plan together. This is going to be helpful tools moving forward. So just the scheduling thing that I wanted to kind of talk with the committee about to kind of make a plan. So our plan, the agenda that we'd had was we were going to focus on a couple of technology related policies, the student and employee kind of, computer use agreement policies, because there's some updates to do of those, and had scheduled it for this. Our next meeting is May 28th, had scheduled it in this time frame so that, we could review them in May and then through the 2 meetings in June could approve those so that they would be updated for the new school year. And so we'd have those kind of updated agreements to kind of launch the new school year. So that's good and work that, we should do ideally, right? There was another policy that Courtney's proposing to add into that around academic honesty that relates to some issues around generative AI that we've been, kind of learning and thinking about a little bit. So that's one batch of policies, a kind of technology related that does have some time sensitivity to be able to have them ready, that ideally we'd have them ready for the beginning of the new school year. The other thing that has happened that folks may be aware is that, the Biden administration's revisions to the Title IX policies and procedures are now final and kind of the official in terms of what should happen. So when we, revised our student harassment policy and then recently the employee harassment policy, the Title IX elements of those were still, because the rules had not been formally adopted and made official, still reflected kind of the Trump DeVos era rules as it related to Title IX. So we have a new set of rules. There's an implementation expectation for those to be, kind of updated and be how we're operating as of August 1st. So we essentially need to bring back kind of the, and I don't, I think we know what those revisions are. We have the rules, we can incorporate them, but we have the student and staff harassment policies and procedures to update with the new Title IX regulations. And those are, expected to be adopted by August 1st. So I think the issue is, to get something adopted by August 1st, given our July recess, right, we need to address it in policy in May or before our sequence of June meetings to have something, voted on and adopted. I guess as I'm saying that, we could consider, not doing 2 reads, but I don't know. I think it's good to continue with our practice generally. I hadn't thought of that. So, but I think all of that's too much for one meeting. Like, I don't think we can do the Title IX updates and the technology stuff all in one meeting. That'd be, we'd be looking at like 6 to 8 policies and procedures, and that's just too much, disparate. So I think our choice is, the choices are, we could just keep with our regular meeting cadence, prioritize the Title IX ones for May, so that those are updated and official as of that August 1st deadline. That would push back the internet use kind of updating such that it would be in August. We could review those in our June June policy committee meeting, and then they would be updated in August. Or we could add another policy committee meeting, such that we have one meeting to review the Title IX and another one for the internet use. And then we could bring both sets of policies forward on the board agendas in our 2 June meetings. So I was looking for any kind of input and guidance from the committee about this issue. So are there questions, clarifications first, and then just any reactions, thoughts the committee has?
I agree that you need to do it in 2 meetings. I'm just scanning things, wondering with all the other activities happening at the end of the school year as well, when you were even thinking about doing that in end of May or even before. Just looking at our first meeting in June is the 4th. So did you have any thoughts on when?
I hadn't actually done the calendar scan on when, was just some of this has kind of recently happened. I was like, well, I'll bring it to the committee. I mean, I can do that and then, share out some possible dates, by email, and then we could touch base on Tuesday, right? When we'll be together at the board meeting, to land something.
Or else we have start at lunch and work till dinner.
Policy committee retreat.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nyla.
Yeah, I think what you said, Aaron, makes sense. So however that can work, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Okay. So I'll do some kind of calendar sleuthing and see, looking at the other board calendars, other district activities, meetings that are happening to see if there's a window to try and identify another meeting date. And again, I think the Title IX stuff, is super important because I think, we're welcoming these revisions. I think they're aligned with kind of the spirit and intent of our work. So anyway,
Aaron,
would you be able
would you be able
to
to text us about the changes in schedule just so that everybody is able to get it directly to their phones? Because I think it's hard with folks accessing email on time.
Okay. Yep. Sure. Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. So we'll look at the calendar, or I'll figure out the calendar. I'll text out some options and we can either land it via text or no later than when we get together next Tuesday.
That sounds good.
Great. Okay. I think that's it then for this evening. If you want to close us out, Nyla.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Wow. Every time. Thank you for joining us. We are adjourned at 6:59. Actually, oh my goodness. All in favor of adjourning the meeting. Thank you. We are adjourned at 6:59 p.m. Wednesday, May 1st. Thank you all. See you.